Scaling quantum computers would be much easier with high-fidelity interconnect and higher temperature qubits. Find out how one company is building exactly such a system in this episode of the Post-Quantum World. I'm your host, Konstantinos Karagiannis. I lead quantum computing services at Protiviti, where we're helping companies prepare for the benefits and threats of this exploding field. I hope you'll join each episode as we explore the technology and business impacts of this post-quantum era. Our guest today is the CEO of Universal Quantum, Sebastian Weidt. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Konstantinos. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And I guess just for everyone listening, we can start out by maybe exploring how you got involved in the quantum field.
Yeah, sure. I don't have one of those nice inspirational stories to tell where I dreamed about quantum when I was 5 years old. That's not quite me. I always wanted to work on something that has impact. And I think back in the days when I was younger, I thought that would be, through business. I think that was quite clear to me at the beginning. And but I also recognized that I probably have to show that I can, do some logical thinking. And, what better way to do that than study physics at undergrad? And I actually did physics with management. And that's where I really started to get some exposure to quantum. But I stuck to my guns and went to management consulting for a little bit. But then decided to do a PhD. And I actually ended up doing a PhD in quantum, focusing on quantum computing and helped develop some nice things, and really started to realize that quantum computing isn't really, just confined to academia in a way, but actually that it's something that would take some sort of commercial trajectory, and that the impact side is unbeatable, right? I think it's difficult to be what hopefully quantum computing will one day do for us. So that got me incredibly excited. So I stayed on, did a postdoc and followed the academic track, initially, became a professor in quantum computing. But at some point, what I think we realized in academia still, that you can't really build the sort of quantum computers that we have in mind in building that will really help us unlock these nice applications of quantum computing in academia. It really felt like it ought to be a venture that's more more commercially focused to attract the right sort of people and attract the right sort of money that you need. And that's really how I ended up in this field in a way.
Yeah, and in academia, a lot of times you end up getting this like paper that gets published with an approach, and then now we got to build a company around it because we're not going to be able to actually turn this into a machine or anything.
Right,
going down. And it's funny. I just to point out something you said. That you don't have one of these inspirational stories, but you kind of do, right? Like you came to it a little later, and you were able to just still dive in and become part of it. So I think for a lot of our listeners, they're interested in the field and want to kind of make the switch. So it is actually always fun to hear about someone who maybe a little later decides that they want to switch over. So yeah. Great story. So tell us back to that point of, in the private sector, you actually have to have a company. Tell us a little bit about Universal Quantum and its aims and goals.
Yeah, sure. So Universal Quantum is a spin-out from the University of Sussex. So we are in the UK, and it focuses on building quantum computers, but not just any sort of quantum computer. Really, what we as a company are focused on is really providing humanity with a tool to do something really amazing. And I think when you apply that thinking to quantum computing, then, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that later on as well, you start realizing that the sort of quantum computer you need to build needs to be a pretty scary big machine. Lots and lots of high quality qubits. But that's really what we're passionate about at Universal Quantum. So we're a company that focuses on scaling up quantum computing. Particularly focused on trapped ions. So trapped ions we use as our qubit. And I think over the many years in academia and, over the years at Universal Quantum, we've, really managed to remove, some of those major obstacles associated to scaling up this particular technology. And I think the other thing worth pointing out is that with that sort of bold vision. I think some people would say, building very, very large scale quantum computers, you naturally have quite an engineering focus. So if you look at universal quantum, you won't just find lots and lots of physicists running around. I think I've been very open about my belief that it won't just be, you don't just want to have physicists build a quantum computer. It really ought to be engineering led. It needs to be some of the world's best engineers together with those amazing physicists building this. And this is really why we're very engineering focused. If you look at our team, it's heavily leaning towards the engineering side, which me as a physicist, I had to get used to that. But I'm a strong believer in that approach.
Yeah, one thing we can agree about with physicists is to them every cow is a sphere. So maybe we shouldn't be thinking along those lines for manufacturing a quantum computer. Right. You have to get down to the engineering practicalities, definitely. So let's start with the biggest goal of the company, and it's a modest goal, right? A tiny one, to build a small little teensy weensy 1 million qubit quantum computer. Whoa, like that's a pretty big goal. So why not start with like 1,000 or something on par with like the systems that are coming out like this year?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing just to be very clear on, we're not saying, look, the first machine we're going to build is a 1 million qubit quantum computer, and hey, you can pick this up next year. It's really pointing to what is ultimately required, and I think it's really important to have that conversation around what quantum computers ultimately need to look like to unlock these amazing applications we associate to quantum computing. And I don't think 100 or 1,000 qubits will be enough. It really ought to be more long-term millions of qubits. So why do we say this right now? I think, and this is again where maybe universal quantum takes a bit of a different tack, where we're pretty ruthless with ourselves in a way when we develop our machines, where really we have that. We always keep that eye on the millions of qubits, where everything we develop, even for the sort of first machines we're developing at the moment, it really needs to stand, withstand that question of, does that really scale to millions of qubits? And thereby, the first machines, which will have, far fewer qubits, really will, those machines will look like a sort of mini version of a 1 million qubit quantum computer. That is for us, the right sort of approach, and to, put this in a different way as well. Let's say we solely focused on building you've said it, maybe 1,000 qubit quantum computer, and our engineers only have that goal in mind. We get to the 1,000 qubit level, we're going to be incredibly excited and happy. But then obviously immediately the question would be, okay, I'd like to have 2,000, please. I'd like to have 10,000 as a next step. Well, what the engineers and everyone involved in building these machines will then ultimately say, it's like, okay, but now I need to kind of walk back and redevelop a lot of the things I've just developed because I never really thought about 10,000 qubits. So you start again. And for us, it's really about the point where, we have 1,000 qubit machine. What we want to be in a position of is, when we want to get to 2,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 qubits, it's just more of the same. That for us is really, really important. It's a bit more painful at the beginning because we're doing a lot of heavy lifting engineering work at the moment to get to a state where the sort of solutions that we employ do scale up. But we do feel in the long term that is the right approach to take.
Yeah, and I want to get into one of the biggest pillars of your approach. So you broke it up into 6 in general that's available on the site. Scalability, I always feel it is greatly dependent on something like the ability to have modular systems that can be stacked and daisy chained or whatever, built up, a concept we talked about here often. So you are working on something called UQ-Connect, which is, I guess, a type of interconnect, which is something I think is critical. Without it, I don't know how we could ever scale. This one landed a publication in Nature. So if we could start maybe talking about why it has a specific name, like UQ-Connect, which is tricky to say, as opposed to just another interconnect. Maybe you can explain what that is and why it has like a fancy moniker.
Yeah, no, sure. It's great you're picking up on this particular pillar, because I think it's absolutely crucial, like you say, to how we're thinking about scaling up. And also, you've mentioned it already that if you do think about scalability, modularity is incredibly important. So the idea of how do you connect individual quantum computing modules together becomes a pretty important question. Now, I often feel that not many people have a good answer to that, and I think that there's still a lot of work, to be done there in many areas. Now, for us, because of the way how our architecture works, we basically, ask the question if there's maybe a very unique way of doing our particular way of connecting modules together that alleviates some of the pains that maybe some other approaches are currently seeing. And what, in a way, we came up with, high level, is a way to connect individual quantum computing modules together using electric fields. Now, these electric fields, they're naturally there all the time. It's one of the ways of how trapped ion quantum computing works. And we've basically been able to engineer our modules in such a way that you simply bring them close enough together. This magical electric field link opens up so that we can directly physically move qubits, trapped ion qubits, from one module to the next. There's no additional engineering involved. There's no intermediary qubit or a photon or something like that involved. It's as pure as it gets. The information never leaves our qubit. It just moves from one module over to the next. And, you've mentioned this particular publication where we've actually demonstrated that. And I remember when we proposed this idea, many years ago, I think a lot of people thought we were somewhat crazy to try and do that, have these trapped ion qubits hop, so to speak, from one module to the next. But that's really where we demonstrated it. And I think, I'll let you be the judge of the quality of the results there. But I think it's working pretty remarkably well, to the point where we believe we don't really have that as a problem anymore. The question of how to connect modules together. For us, that is really ticked off.
And do you feel that you have a sense of how many qubits should be in one of these modules yet before you start, expanding?
Yeah, I think if you would have asked me this question a few years ago, I would have said, look, we're going to make these modules as big as possible, right? Push towards maybe wafer scale, and then squeeze as many qubits on and then make that step. I think what we've really realized through the work that we've done on these connections, and because these connections for us work so well, it no longer matters how big each module is, because for us, making a connection is pretty much error-free. It doesn't really take a penalty. And therefore, we can really focus on letting the engineering be the driver of how big the modules should be. So yield considerations, generally when you make these sort of modules, there's lots of things you have to think about purely from an engineering point of view. It's no longer dictated from the quantum side.
So are there issues with the support circuitry for each module, though? Like if you were to have too many qubits, then would it be too much interference in these modules? Each one is like close together and they each are trying to control. And then all of a sudden it just becomes that equivalent of like having a lot of wires or a lot of, circuitry. Like that's what I was thinking along the lines of like, is there a number where if you go too big, then it becomes an issue?
Yeah, right. I think, generally right now across the board, the problem is like you add more qubits, you need more wires, and it just becomes a little bit of a mess. It's if I can put it that simply. And I think this is why we haven't really talked about that bit yet. The modular approach is really asking for a good way to connect individual modules together, but it also puts a requirement on what each module looks like. And what I say here is that for this to really work properly in modular architecture, each module really needs to act like a standalone mini quantum computer. So most of the things that you need to control the qubits in your module need to be integrated into that particular module. And that really starts to get you around, a lot of those wiring issues and so on. And then the other bit, obviously, that you need is the way you control the quantum. We can get to that point, later on as well. You better have a way to do that in a non-interfering way. And again, here we have some novelties that allow us to achieve exactly that.
Yeah, so let's move through the other pillars and kind of get a sense of what these look like to visualize it. The first point to bring up is these, as you said earlier, these are trapped ion qubits. We've seen this before, a couple other big companies making these. What kind of fidelities are you seeing? And what makes your approach different to, let's say, the bow tie approach we've seen before?
Yeah, so I think it's probably fair to say that trapped ion systems are the best performing ones. If you look at the sort of achievable gate fidelities, that they're world leading. It's one of the reasons we really like this qubit. It's well isolated, it's well controllable. I think it's beautiful, and the fidelities are amazing. But equally, I think when you sometimes look at how those quantum gates are implemented, it sometimes becomes challenging to see how that pristine control survives as you scale up. Often I think people like to use the individual laser beams aligned onto individual trapped ion qubits, which just works amazingly well at the moment. How that scales up, remains to be seen. And I think we had some concerns around that in a way where we developed a different gate technology, which negates the use of laser beams. And I think here we're actually getting into one of our other pillars. If I can sidetrack into that,
Sure.
It seems to naturally lend itself to it there. Where basically what we've done is we replaced the requirement of laser beams where, just to put this into the listener's context, it's usually you would need around 2 laser beams for every qubit that you want to operate on in parallel on order. So it's okay where we are right now. It may be okay for 1,000 qubits, but as this scales up, one can imagine that gets pretty complicated. So what we've done is we've replaced the need for lasers with a handful of microwave fields. The key thing here is not in the microwaves. I also wouldn't want to have millions of microwave fields to control and scale. We took this another level further, whereby no matter how many qubits we have in our quantum computer, we only ever need a handful of microwave fields that are being sent everywhere to all qubits. And we developed a trick whereby we maintain the individual controllability of each qubit. That's the nice thing when it comes to the sort of control approach that we have at Universal Quantum.
So is there some kind of interference that happens with the fields to control particular qubits?
No, so they fortunately not, because people sometimes try to play around with interference, but it doesn't really work that well. It gives you something, but it doesn't work that well. So we don't use that at all. We've basically developed 2 things. One, we have a qubit which we can tune, and what I mean by that is the sort of energy that we need to put in to change a qubit. We can tune that qubit so different energies will be required to change the qubit state from 1 to 0, for example. That controllability allows us to tune a qubit into resonance or into a particular global channel that we have, just like your radio operates, right? Let's say you have 3 different channels. One is do nothing, another channel is to a single qubit gate, and another channel is to do a 2 qubit gate, and they all live in different frequencies. Different frequencies are being radiated to the quantum computer. We now have a way to locally tune each qubit into whichever channel we would like it to tune into, to, for example, do a single qubit gate or a 2 qubit gate. And that way we get around the interference problem. For us, microwaves are everywhere. Some microwave fields go straight through a qubit and don't interact with it, and it only interacts with the qubits that we actually do want it to interact with. So it's quite technical. But high level, I think the key thing is there's no correlation between the number of qubits in your machine and the number of radiation fields we have to send in. That is the big win for us. And therefore, technically, if you came to look at our machines right now, the control boxes that we have that generate these radiation fields that replace the lasers, it's the same box that we have right now that we'll have for 1,000 qubits, 100,000 qubits, or 1,000,000 qubits. That is the essence of it, really.
Yeah, so scalability is thought of throughout. It sounds
everywhere.
like
You'll hopefully see it everywhere. Yes.
Yeah, every piece. So the fidelity of these gates and qubits, do you have like numbers for those, or is it too soon?
Yeah, no, we've published some stuff. I think in terms of what Universal Quantum we put out there, wait and see, and you get to play with it. But we've demonstrated that this particular gate that we've developed works really well. But what the first machines will show, I refer you to when they come online.
Okay. I guess we'll talk about timeline a little later on.
Sure.
So one other aspect of these qubits is they're something you don't normally hear. They're warmer, right, than what you'd expect. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So in general, I think whenever I talk to people about quantum computing, one of the first things they say is like, "Oh, it's really cold." And I think a lot of people just come accustomed to, maybe having to cool down to millikelvin temperatures near absolute zero. I think trapped ions in general have this advantage that you don't need to do that. There'll be some systems that are sitting around sort of room temperature. But I think in general, for us, for example, what we really like to operate at is 70 Kelvin, which is a very, in the grand scheme of things, warm temperature where a lot of cooling power is available, even at scale. And this is really the key part. If anyone wonders, why do you care about temperature? When you're very, very cold, you don't have a lot of cooling power available. And generally, as you make your quantum computer bigger, you have to dump more energy in that heats up the system and it causes you some problems. And therefore, the warmer you are, the better these cooling systems work, the more cooling power you have available to put more stuff in. And at 70 Kelvin, for us, we really feel that can take us, all the way to the million qubit scale.
Yeah, that's so many of orders magnitude warmer than other qubits. I don't even know how to come up with an analogy for that. It's like standing on Earth and standing on the sun. It's like almost that much of a difference, right, in terms of magnitudes.
Yeah.
Huge deal. So we have all this working on these modules, and they're fully integrated. So everything is inside per module. Do you want to talk a little bit about that design and what will make it so scalable? So we got everything there. We have like the microwaves. We have the whole gate like system in place, and then how do they connect to something else like that full integration? How does it get passed on to like control circuitry?
Yeah. So the other part that we need when we talk about controlling our qubits is sort of quasi-static DC voltages that can change in time. Basically, and that allows us to physically move qubits around. Now, why do we like to do that? And this really nicely leads me on to talk about connectivity. And what I mean by connectivity in quantum computing is the ability of a qubit to talk to another qubit in the system. Now, when we're talking about architectures where you're physically printing qubits in place, when they're static, in a solid, for example, you have a nearest neighbor architecture where a particular qubit can only talk to the one that's sitting right next to it. In our particular case, because we can move these qubits around in a pretty error-free way, we can get to a more fully connected system, which high level means that any algorithm that you want to run just runs so much better, so much more efficient. That connectivity really speeds up the quantum computer quite significantly. So therefore, we need to think about how do we generate and how do we get these changing voltages to the chip. And there we do some integration work. Again, we develop specific ASICs, so application-specific integrated circuits, that we integrate into our chip architecture to generate these voltages right where they're actually needed and no longer need these control wires that you often see when you look at quantum computing systems. Lots of wires, always going to a very small chip, which is good right now, doesn't really scale. We need to get rid of the wires and integrate it into the chip. And this is exactly what we're doing with what we refer to as an integrated quantum processing unit, or IQPU. So that's another thing that we like to integrate.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And when you start to look at all these potentials for things that could go wrong, like all these controls that can go a little awry, I guess we start to think about errors. And I want to talk a little bit about what your thoughts are on error correction and maybe suppression and mitigation, because they're all different things. Like which of those are you already experimenting with, and what are your plans, and maybe even some guesses on maybe that dreaded ratio, right? Like how many qubits will it take to get a logical, and just any thoughts around that area would be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, obviously, aren't these errors annoying? Wouldn't it be nice if quantum computing didn't have any? But at the same time, fortunately, error correction exists. And I mean, for any listener who doesn't know, the reason we're talking about millions of qubits is because of the errors. Error correction algorithms basically saying, give me lots and lots of qubits and I remove the errors for you. It's one of the reasons we have to work so hard on the qubit number side. So I think one of the things, and it probably won't be a surprise to you because we think about these larger scale systems a lot. The point of error correction it is a very big one for us right now, because if you want to start thinking about what a design for such a system looks like, and we published, for example, the world's first blueprint to build a million qubit quantum computer, you have to know what error correction demands, what it wants from you, how can it best operate, so that you can incorporate that into the design of your machine right from day one. Some may say, hey, you're thinking about a bit too early, but again, we're weird, and we think it's really important to think about those things right now. So yes, we think about error correction a lot. We've got a number of collaborations and funded projects around that, and we're trying to integrate what error correction requires into our modules right now. I think you also mentioned error suppression, error mitigation. They're all part of the sort of strategy toolbox, that we're exploring to get a handle on these errors, and are part of our sort of ongoing development at the moment.
It might be too soon to figure this out, but do you think it would make sense to get the module to the point where it becomes a logical qubit or two itself? Like, is that the ideal module?
I imagine a lot of people have to think that way. Again, what I was saying earlier, because for us there's no overhead to connect modules together, we don't have to work really hard to try and get a logical qubit into one module. If you have a particular connect technology which is lots of errors or very slow, you ought to think very hard how you can maybe get enough qubits into one module to turn it into a logical qubit, because there's a lot going on within a logical qubit that's really important. If you don't have that worry on connecting modules, you've got some flexibility here, and we don't have to necessarily squeeze that in. We can be a bit more free thinking there.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because if it turns out that you need 1,000 to make a logical qubit, that becomes trickier.
Yeah. So for us, it doesn't matter. Obviously, one always wants to work on minimizing this ratio that you talked about. So the ratio of physical qubits to logical qubits. And we're doing some of our own work there as well to see if we can leverage some of the advantages that our system have. We talked about connectivity and so on. If that lends itself to improve certain error correction algorithms to reduce that ratio. But ultimately, we at least don't have to worry about it from a hardware perspective to try and get this into the size of one module.
Yeah, and I'm going to have in the show notes a link to the company, and I want people to look particular at the UQ Connect, because just the visuals, like just to get a sense of how it all works. It's pretty cool to look at. Is it too soon to talk timeline then? Do you have any sense of like what the first time you're going to slap a few of these modules together into a box might look like?
We're building it all right now, and probably no surprise that I won't give you a date necessarily, but I think what is publicly available is, for example, not too long ago, we, got 2 large contracts from the German government for 70 million euros to build them 2 quantum computers. And the timelines there are publicly available. Maybe a bit slower than what we're going to do, elsewhere. But, over the next couple of years, you're going to see some pretty cool machines.
And did you give any thought to what it'll be like to program them? Are you going to build it on an existing platform? Like, for example, will it be Qiskit going in, or something like that? Or you just be developing an entirely new kind of like paradigm for that?
Yeah, I mean, programming is so important, right? I think there's a lot to squeeze out of these machines purely from a programming side, and there's a lot of work to do. I think there's some absolutely phenomenal people, companies out there working on the software side that some of them we're already collaborating with, and I wouldn't want to try to replicate the amazing work that they've done. I think we maintain very committed to having control over our stack, over our software stack. So we would like to maintain access to our customer directly. So we are building a cloud infrastructure for that. But the way you can, in a way, imagine this software stack is quite modular, so that someone who's developed a really cool software piece can, in a way, integrate this into our modular software stack, and it can interact with the higher level and with the lower level. So that's in a way how we're trying to marry the 2 concepts together.
So like some other companies, you're
Yes,
envisioning
we're not
having
unique.
like your own cloud, but then maybe the potential for through some other abstraction layer, like connecting to Bracket or something
Absolutely. Yes.
to let people in. Okay, yeah, that makes sense to reach more potential users. All right, yeah, that's pretty exciting stuff. It's the UQ Connect that I think is going to be the real game changer here, just from what I've seen so far. If I had to make a guess, so I do urge people to take a look. And I don't know if there's any last other thoughts you want to leave our listeners with before we sign off.
No, I mean, one, look at UQ Connect, but look at the other things as well. For us, I think when you think about scalability, for us, you have to look at the whole architecture together, because for us, it really all comes together and works as one in a way. But you're right, UQ Connect is absolutely key. I think the way we control our qubits is really important as well. Have a look, engage. Thank you for listening to Quantum Podcast. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. How many people do listen to this topic. Thank you so much for listening to me as well. And please engage and reach out if you have any questions. Please get in touch with us. We're very happy to speak to people out there.
Now it's time for Coherence, the Quantum Executive Summary, where I take a moment to highlight some of the business impacts we discussed today, in case things got too nerdy at times. Let's recap. Universal Quantum is a company with a plan to build a 1 million qubit quantum computer. They're not counting on some future breakthrough to manifest either. They've got a plan based on current technology. For starters, there's UQ Connect, a type of interconnect with better than 99.999993% connection fidelity. That's 5 nines after the decimal. The technology allows qubits to move between independent modules freely if the modules are close together, all without additional engineering. I put a link to the Nature paper on this approach in the show notes. These moving qubits are trapped ions, and the control circuitry for them is integrated into each module. All this operates at about 70 Kelvin, which is several orders of magnitude warmer than most quantum computing modalities. Universal Quantum hopes all these factors will contribute to a realistically scalable system, and the company is already contracted to build systems for the German government. That does it for this episode. Thanks to Sebastian Weidt for joining to discuss Universal Quantum, and thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to Protiviti's The Post-Quantum World, and maybe leave a review to help others find us. Be sure to follow me on all socials at Constant Hacker. That's Constant with a K, Hacker. You'll find links there to what we're doing in quantum computing services at Protiviti. You can also DM me questions or suggestions for what you'd like to hear on the show. For more on our quantum services, check out Protiviti.com or follow Protiviti Tech on Twitter and LinkedIn. Until next time, be kind and stay quantum curious.